This video is brought to you by Squarespace. So in my last in the field video, I put together an astrophotography image that was composed of 4 different images. There was a couple light painted frames in there. There was a long exposure for the shadow information, and then 1 image for the sky. And as a result, there was a lot of questions that came in about how I went about putting that photo together. So I figured it would make a good video. So that's what this video is. Let's do it. So that image was composed of this frame, which is a long exposure. It's a 3-minute long exposure at ISO 800. This frame, which is a faster exposure taken for the sky. And then this exposure for a little bit of light painting and dimensionality to the light that was hitting the schoolhouse. And then this image where essentially we're just going to use a little bit of the light painting from inside the doorway. So the first thing that we need to do, and the first thing that I do to most of the images I edit, is I open them up as a smart object inside of Photoshop. Smart object is nothing more than opening it up inside of Photoshop where you still have access to the raw file. It's always the best way to do it if you can get away with it. So all I'm going to do is select the first image, hold down Shift, select on the 4th image. So they're all 4 selected. Right click, go up to Edit In, open a smart object in Photoshop. Now, when I do this, the unfortunate thing is that Photoshop doesn't have a way of automatically opening them up as layers in the same file. So we're going to have to put them into the same file. It's pretty easy to do though. So now if we look here inside of Photoshop, we have 4 different files open. That's each one of these images. Now, the manual way to do this is I could just hold down Shift, grab the Move tool, hold down Shift, click on the thumbnail, and drag it to whatever file we want to work from, and then let go. So that brings it into this file here. You can see that there are still smart objects because we have that little icon in the bottom right corner of the thumbnail. So we would have to do this for all 4 of the images. Bring it over, drop it, grab this one, bring it over, and drop it. So now they're all in the same file. Or another way of doing that for those of you that have Lumenzia, if we go back a few steps here, I could open up Lumenzia, click on the pre-blend button. Then it brings up this dialog box where essentially I could have it align things. I could check the alignment. But in this case, all we want to do is add black masks and then hit blend documents. And also you can select whether you have the darkest on top or whatnot. It doesn't really matter for this image, but it's useful in an exposure blending type situation. So if I hit the blend documents, it's going to essentially do the exact same thing, only it's going to give us black layer masks as well, which will be pretty useful to start off with black layer masks. So those of you that have Lumenzia, it's pretty easy. Now, if I disable these layer masks, we have light painted frame number 2 on top, light painted frame number 1, and then we have sky image, and we have foreground image. So the first thing that we need to do is I want to go in and I want to make things match a little bit. You see, if we look at the white balance between this image and our sky frame, you can see how much more blue tone there is in this long exposure. We need to kind of tone that down or else they're not going to look very natural when we blend them together. Also, the entire point of this frame is to have nice, clean shadows. So I want to make sure that we're maintaining that shadow information. We don't want it to get too contrasty. While on the other hand, we want a lot of contrast in our sky frame to really bring out that Milky Way and to make the stars pop. First thing I want to do is we'll double click on this base layer. This is our long exposure frame. And now that's going to bring up Adobe Camera Raw because this is a smart object. So I'm going to go in, first things first, let's try to get our white balance a little bit more neutral. Somewhere in here looks good. Also, in the video, I mentioned that we had a lot of red light pollution back here in this background. This is something that I want to take care of both in this frame and our sky frame to make things a little bit easier for us. So rather than trying to do that through white balance and through the tint slider, we're going to use the HSL panel for that. Before we get there though, I do want to open my shadows a little bit. I want to recover highlights quite a bit because in this frame, remember, This is going to be for the shadow areas of our image, and there really is no need to have our highlights and our whites, you know, very bright, because all that's really doing is increasing contrast. And in this situation, we actually need to decrease contrast. That way we can have our shadow areas very flat, but still very, very open. You know, the more contrast we add, the more shadow information we're going to lose. But if we have a nice flat image for our shadow areas, we're going to be able to keep them dark, but still keep them detailed. And that's important. So I'm going to go ahead and open the shadows, bring down exposure a bit, really keeping an eye on the histogram to make sure that we're not, you know, approaching black with any of this. Let's go down to the detail tab. We're going to mask out some sharpening by holding down Alt or Option and then sliding the masking slider in the sharpening section to the right. There's no need to sharpen noise. We only need to sharpen details. And then I want to decrease the radius, increase the detail. That's just something I do in all of my images to make sure that it's a very fine grained sharpening. And if we zoom in here, you can see that things are really quite clean. There's a few hot pixels in here, and actually if we add a little bit of color noise reduction, that's going to help with a lot of those hot pixels. If we look at this hot pixel here, this is with no color noise reduction. You can see how saturated these blue pixels are, but if I add a bunch of color noise reduction, it desaturates those and it gets us to a little better place. And really, that's kind of the only noise reduction we need to do in this, which is pretty impressive. Let's go down to our color mixer in Lightroom. It's just the HSL panel. And what I want to do is we're going to desaturate these reds a little bit. So we're here in the saturation tab. Let's desaturate those reds. But let's also go over to the hue tab and push these reds a little bit towards orange. That way, rather than feeling like really red light pollution, we're going to make it actually blend with some of the warm tones that were happening inside the Milky Way and with our light painting. If we can kind of make all of that match a little bit, it'll have a more cohesive color palette rather than having that bright red that just demands the eye in the background. And we can even kind of bring down the luminance of those oranges, and it'll really tone that down quite a bit. Okay, at this point, I'm just going to hit OK. And now that has taken care of the shadow frame. Now we need to go ahead and go up, turn on our sky frame, double click it, and we're going to process this one in Adobe Camera Raw and try to get the Milky Way, get the sky looking the way we want it. We're going to want to add contrast, try to make that Milky Way really stand out. But also because we took this at ISO 4000, we might need to start doing a little bit of noise reduction, or at least like keep an eye on the noise, make sure we're not adding too much. So if we go up to the basic panel, let's try to get our white balance in the realm where we want it. When I'm picking a white balance for my sky frames, astrophotography frames, I'm always trying to get it to where there's cool tones, but not too many in the sky. I don't want the area between the stars to be blue, but I also want there to be a color temperature difference between the warm areas in the Milky Way and that sky. So a cool little trick for getting your white balance, you know, a little bit closer to where you want it is I'll go down and I will just crank the saturation all the way up down here. And then I will pick my white balance. It really helps you see what tones and colors you have going on in your sky by bumping that up. And then once we find our white balance, we'll bring it back down. A little bit more magenta, warm it up just a tiny bit, something like this. I like the color, you know, the color contrast between the areas between the Milky Way, between the stars, and the gases in the Milky Way. So let's bring the saturation back down. I like this for our white balance. Something I do in all astrophotography images to make the stars pop is I like to really increase the whites. So by bringing up the white slider, you can see that it brightens the image overall, but it also adds a lot of contrast in the highlights, which are going to be our stars. And then I can bring the highlight slider to the left, add a little contrast, and bring down the exposure. So by doing that, we've added a lot of contrast in the sky. We've made the stars pop a little bit more. And you know, the rest of the image doesn't look great, but that's okay because we're going to be using the other frame for our shadow information. So we can really block up our shadows here and we're going to be just fine. Let's go down to our detail tab now, decrease the radius, increase the detail, mask out our sharpening by holding down Alt or Option, sliding this to the right. And I want to slide this far enough to where we're not sharpening the area between stars. We're only sharpening the stars themselves. There's no point in sharpening noise because it's only going to make the noise problem worse. So let's slide this quite a ways over to the right to where we're sharpening stars and details, but not much else. Now let's zoom in to our sky here and see if we even need to add any noise reduction. I try to avoid it if I can. Let's add a little bit of noise reduction, but not go too crazy with it. About 14 points to me looks just fine. So at this point, I feel like sky is looking pretty good. One last thing to take care of, because we're going to be blending this with the shadow information file, we want to make sure that these reds down here are very similar to, you know, the other frame. So let's do the same thing that we did in the other frame. Let's go to the saturation, desaturate those reds, go to the hue, push those reds over towards orange. Some of the oranges a little bit towards yellow. Let's go to the luminance, bring down the luminance of the reds. We got to really take it easy with the oranges because we have orange in our Milky Way here. If you see when I do this, it really affects that area. So we can't really bring down the luminance of the orange, but we can in the reds. So I sent something like that, I think will work. Ideally, we're not going to be using any of this frame in that area on those silos, but you know, just to make the blending process a little bit easier, the more they match, the less it's going to matter. So it's good to do a little bit of matching now. So I'm going to hit OK. The first step to this is let's bring in our sky into our shadow information frame. So we're going to reactivate this layer mask, which is going to hide our sky frame because black conceals, white reveals, black conceals. So now we have a black layer mask here. And as I grab a paintbrush, we're going to make sure that it is 100% white. We're going to use 100% opacity, 100% flow, and I'm going to start at the top of the frame and start bringing it in. So now what the goal here is to bring it down close to our schoolhouse without actually overlapping anywhere. The reason we got to be careful not to overlap is because remember how blocked up those shadows were in our shadow areas. So we want to make sure that we don't accidentally do any of that. So we're bringing it down close to the horizon and we're kind of creating a little bit of a halo here. You can see where I have stopped, just bringing it down fairly close to the schoolhouse. And that's looking pretty good. Now what we need to do is we need to make a selection of some kind to help us finish off that blend process. So we could make a selection just with the quick selection tool. You know, we have pretty sharp lines here, so that would actually work pretty well. Another thing that we could attempt is we could see if the Photoshop select sky option works as well. Let's just go ahead and try that. Let's see. This is not how I did it the first time, but we can try it. Let's go to select sky and we'll see if it makes a decent selection of the sky. If we zoom in here, it looks like it's done a very decent job around this schoolhouse. So, you know, that's a one-click thing. Might as well use it. Let's go ahead and hit Control or Command H, which will hide the marching ants. With our white paintbrush, let's finish the area around the schoolhouse, and we're going to stay zoomed in and make sure that it doesn't create any weird artifacts. If that selection isn't great, then it will create artifacts. But honestly, as I do this, it's looking pretty decent. You know, we want to make sure that we don't have any weird streaked out stars. So that's why you want to zoom in as you do this. And it's really kind of amazing how easy that select sky option is inside of Photoshop. In the past, I will either use a quick selection tool or I will more likely use a luminosity mask. But you have to be so much more careful with a luminosity mask than you do with this select sky. So let's zoom in here, see if this was selected. So this is an area that was not part of the selection that Photoshop gave us. So we'll have to remember to come back to that. Let's see how it did over by these bushes. So as I start to bring this in, honestly, it looks pretty decent. Now you can see one of the strange things that we have going on here is we have more noise in the sky than we do, you know, not in the sky. So we're going to have to do something about that later on. We'll make a mental note of that. Did a pretty decent job here around the silo, which is pretty cool. And, you know, coming from someone that's been doing these types of images for a while, this select sky feature in Photoshop is almost painfully easy. Like, it almost feels a little bit like cheating because I had to work way harder than this not long ago. And now everybody else gets to do it the easy way. Cheaters. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit the backslash key below the backspace key. And it's just going to kind of give me a quick visual to see if there's any spots that I missed. So these red areas are areas that I still need to bring in my blend here. So we'll quickly go in, grab those. Again, you bring up this visualization mask using the backslash key below the backspace key. It's just a quick way to visualize any areas that you still need to bring in to your. So now I've deselected the sky by going Control or Command D for deselect. And now we need to go in and make a new selection just so we can bring in this area here. We don't want to try to just manually paint it because if I try, you can see that we're going to create an artifact there. So what we need to do, and this is really simple because we have nice sharp edges to work with here, we're just going to go up, grab our quick selection tool, which is this guy here, quickly select this. And then with that selected, grab our brush and paint through that selection. And bada bing, bada boom, it works like a stencil. So there we go. Now when we zoom in, turn this layer off and on, before, after we have blended the shadow information frame with that sky frame. And honestly, for most astrophotography, those are going to be the two big main steps. If you can take a nice long exposure to get nice clean shadows and then a faster exposure to freeze the stars, that's going to get you through most astrophotography. And this is called dual processing or exposure blending or shutter speed stacking or twilight blending, because if you do that frame for the shadow information a little bit earlier in the evening when the ambient light is still a little bit brighter, you can do it with a lower ISO and get much cleaner shadows. Okay, so the next step is to bring in our light painted frame. So if I turn on this first one, you can see I basically literally shot it with very similar settings as our sky frame, but there's a lot of light painted areas that I don't want to bring in. We want to bring in some, but not all. Now there's a really useful blend mode called lighten, where if I change it to lighten, it's only going to bring in the pixels that are brighter than the pixels below, which is really, really useful. But as it is, in my opinion, this is overdone and it brings in areas that we don't necessarily want. And anywhere that the stars moved, oftentimes it'll also bring in the stars, which we don't want. So it's not perfect. We're still going to have to use a layer mask for this. But we also need to tweak this so it's a little bit more subtle. So the first thing that I'm going to do is double click on this layer, which is going to bring up Adobe Camera Raw because we opened this up as a smart object. And that means that we still have access to the raw file. And now we can kind of mellow it out and make it to where it's, you know, it's going to blend a little bit more tastefully with the frames below it. So for me, in order to make it more tasteful, we need to recover highlights so those highlights are not quite as bright. Maybe we can open shadows, decrease a little contrast, and we can kind of be a little bit more creative with color temperature too, because we're shooting in RAW. I can kind of make this light as cool or as warm as we want. So I think in the original edit, I kind of went with a cooler color temperature for the outside, the exterior light, kind of mimic some kind of moonlight or something. And then I went warmer with the interior light. But it can really kind of be whatever you want. But I'm going to go a little bit cool with this, recover those highlights quite a bit. And let's go ahead and throw a graduated filter and darken the highlights over on the left side of the frame, just like this. It's more of a spotlighty effect on the schoolhouse itself rather than the stuff happening off to the left. And then we're going to hit OK. So now you can see when we turn this off and on, it's a cooler color temperature. It's not as contrasty. It blends a little bit better, but it's also happening in areas that we don't want it. So let's activate this layer mask. And because it's filled with black, that means it's going to hide everything. And now just grab a paintbrush. We have it set to the light and blend mode. So it's only going to bring in where these pixels are brighter than the layers below it. And with a white layer mask and with a white paintbrush, I'm just going to start bringing it in. I've got a very soft paintbrush here. We're going to bring it in on the building. Now I'm going to decrease my opacity like 40% and see if we can just kind of feather it in a little bit. Let's go even 20%. I don't want to get over in here where you can actually see where I was. I wanted to have a nice smooth transition from light painted to not light painted. So before, after, before, after. You also want to be kind of careful and make sure that we're not getting any duplicated stars. That's really easy to do if you're not paying attention. What I like about this light painted frame is that it adds just a little bit of dimensionality to the light. It's not super flat. It's got a little bit of, it's got a highlight side, a shadow side. And the cool thing about smart objects is that if we decide, well, I don't really like this cooler color temperature, let's double click on that smart object layer and let's see what it looks like warmed up. So I've just warmed it up, hit OK. And you know, I kind of like that warmer color temperature, I think. It feels a little bit more like it's getting hit with a light rather than moonlight. So let me tell you about a little business you've probably never heard of. They're called Squarespace. So I've been using Squarespace for like 7 years. And the reason I use it is because it's really, really easy. I don't know how to code. I don't know any of that, but I know how to make my Squarespace website look exactly the way I want it. You know, the galleries look good. They look clean. They're really easy to put together. And I'm able to, you know, sell spots to my workshops because their e-commerce section is really intuitive. It links with Stripe. It all just works. So the cool thing about Squarespace is that you don't have to sign up with any kind of credit card or anything like that to give it a try. Just go to squarespace.com/NickPage, and then you can do your 14-day free trial. And if you decide that it is for you, use the offer code NickPage at checkout, and that's going to get you 10% off your first purchase. So thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. Let's get back to the edit. One more layer to go to bring this in. We've got this light painted interior here. Let's change the blend mode to lighten. And you see as is, it's pretty bright and is very neutral. It's very white. So let's turn on the layer mask. Let's double click the smart object layer. And let's see if we can really darken it down, recover those highlights a lot. So we still have, you know, highlight information there. I actually blew out. Looks like I overexposed some of the areas there, so we don't want to go too dark. And let's warm it way up. So it feels like there's kind of a warmish red light emanating from inside. Add a little negative clarity, a little negative dehaze, make it a little bit more glowy, hit OK. So now we can just manually paint on this layer mask. I'm going to go to 100% white paintbrush, and I can just bring that in. Honestly, part of me doesn't even want to include that, but for the sake of this tutorial, we'll include it. So before, after, before, after. And if we turn off both of these light painted frames, it went from this to this. And it just kind of gives us something little extra, just something special. It's no big deal, yeah, but I think it's cool. So at this point, there's more that we could do. We could go in and we could clone out the airplanes in the sky, the satellite, and then obviously I would want to do some dodging and burning, add a little contrast to the Milky Way, but the skeleton of the frame is here. We took those 4 frames, we blended them into one. We have nice sharp stars with a nice long exposure, so we got cleaner shadows, and the light painted frames added a nice dimensionality to the frame. Light painting is so much fun to do because, you know, there's no end to how much you can do. You could do hundreds of these layers if you wanted to and just do little bits at a time. Just remember that the light and blend mode is your friend when you're putting these together. And then when you combine that with a smart object, so you can really tweak it and make it blend tastefully, and then you can use layer masks as well to bring it in just in the areas you need. It's really powerful too. So hopefully you'll give some of this stuff a try, and hopefully this was interesting to you guys. So yeah, thank you guys thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Take it easy, everybody.